Okay, so have you ever felt that? Like something is, I don't know, just off, not necessarily bad, just like really quiet. It's that unsettling calm right before a storm hits.
Hmm.
That's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
A fictional world that is on the brink of a global apocalypse.
Right.
And you already know me, I just had to unpack this excerpt, part 1, The Ominous Silence Before the Storm. Because who doesn't love a good pre-apocalypse story?
Well, and what I think is so interesting about it is how the author captures that very human tendency that we have to cling to normalcy.
Yeah.
Even when the whole world is kind of hinting at, like, something's not right.
Exactly. The excerpt even mentions people like going about their day, grabbing coffee, commuting, checking the news, just like the usual everyday stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost comical how no one seems to notice that something really big is about to happen.
Oh, it's totally normalcy bias. It's like our brains are hardwired to just expect things to continue in these familiar patterns. So when little warning signs pop up, we just explain them away.
Right.
Or dismiss them because it's easier than accepting that everything's about to change.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, the sky's a weird color today. Must be my sunglasses.
Right. Must be my eyes.
Exactly. But then the story changes. It describes this moment, like a global pause, where everyone feels this, I don't know, shift, this unease. Imagine, like, streets full of people, bustling cities, quiet villages, and then everyone just everywhere stops for a second.
Wow.
It's like the planet itself is taking a deep breath before something happens.
It's interesting you say that because this idea, the sort of collective premonition, is something that a lot of cultures have thought about for, hundreds, thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
And, some people might just call it intuition, while others have these more mystical explanations.
Right.
But whatever it is, it's like it's tapping into this primal part of us, that just kind of senses change, danger, even when we're not aware of it on a conscious level.
Okay, so we've got this like eerie calm, the global anxiety, and then silence.
Yes.
Not a peaceful, quiet type of silence, but this heavy, almost suffocating silence, as if the air itself is bracing for impact. And it's interesting, the excerpt mentions that the first people who feel it are those who have already experienced trauma or something really difficult in their past. It's like past trauma makes you hypersensitive to the world changing in some way.
Yeah, and there's something, I don't know, kind of heartbreaking about that. It's like those who have survived hardship and made it through to the other side, they develop this real awareness, this sensitivity to their surroundings because they've learned to read the subtle signs.
Right, like they're picking up on those things that other people miss.
Exactly.
And if all of that wasn't bad enough, the story then starts giving us these real world clues. It talks about blood red sunsets, crops failing, hospitals being overrun with people that are sick with some mysterious illness. It's like the planet itself is starting to just, I don't know, unravel.
Yeah, it's true. And it's like this classic storytelling device. It's highlighting that even when we're faced with all these seemingly unrelated events that don't make sense on their own, humans still search for patterns and connections.
Yes, we try to make sense of the chaos, which makes this next part even more tragic. The excerpt mentions all these ancient prophecies that foretold this eerie calm, this perfect storm of global weirdness. But you know what? No one listened. Makes you wonder, if we knew the end was near, would we change how we live our lives today?
That's the question, isn't it? Would we even recognize the signs, or would we be so caught up in our routines and our own little worlds that we miss the silence? Something to think about. Part 2, no less.
Part 2. Okay, so we're already in it. But seriously, we're talking about those harbingers of doom, the horsemen.
Yeah.
But instead of focusing on the chaos and destruction.
We're looking for the whispers, the first signs that things are going sideways.
Exactly. The stuff people might miss or explain away because, well, nobody wants to believe the world's ending.
It's human nature. Look at any disaster, big or small. There are always warning signs.
Totally. But we miss them or ignore them.
Until it's too late. And that's where our deep dive gets interesting, because in this story, there's this eerie calm after the initial event, like the world takes a breath.
Okay, I'm getting chills already. It's that quiet before the storm, isn't it? Like everything seems normal on the surface, but you can just feel it. Something's wrong.
It's cognitive dissonance at its finest. Your brain is trying to reconcile two conflicting ideas. One, life seems to be going on as usual, but two,
there's this creeping sense of dread, like something terrible is about to happen.
And that tension, it manifests in different ways. Some people get super anxious, some become hypervigilant, and then there are those who just
bury their heads in the sand.
Exactly, but ignorance isn't bliss when you're talking about the apocalypse.
Okay, so the world's on edge, everyone's feeling it, and then, bam, the signs start showing up. And the first one hits where it hurts. Food.
The foundation of civilization.
Our story paints a grim picture. Imagine, you're a farmer. You've poured your blood, sweat, and tears into your land, and then one day, your crops just start rotting.
And it's not just one farm, it's happening everywhere. Crops fail, livestock die, rivers dry up.
And people, they're starting to panic. Because if you can't feed yourself or your family...
You have chaos. It's the horseman of famine, though the story doesn't call him that directly. It's this slow, creeping starvation.
The most basic human need denied.
And with it comes desperation, which might explain what happens next.
Because as if the food shortages weren't bad enough, the world decides to add a little fuel to the fire. War.
Ah, yes. The escalation of conflict. It's almost inevitable in these end-of-the-world scenarios, isn't it?
It's like someone hit the fast-forward button on global tensions. Alliances crumble overnight. Treaties are tossed aside.
Leaders make speeches about peace, but behind closed doors.
They're mobilizing armies.
Because they know what's coming. And they're determined to survive, no matter the cost. It's primal. The need to protect your own.
But here's the thing, it's not just about territory or resources this time. It's like this deep-seated fear is driving everyone to the brink.
The world is a very different place when you're staring down the end. Morals shift, priorities change.
And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. Because now, on top of famine and war, we have
disease.
And not just your run-of-the-mill flu season, we're talking full-blown pandemic.
Hospitals are overrun, doctors are baffled, people are dying, and the worst part...
It seems to be spreading faster than they can contain it.
It's pestilence. Unchecked, indiscriminate, merciless.
Our source material goes into some pretty graphic detail about the symptoms. Let's just say, it's not pretty.
And that feeling of helplessness, of being at the mercy of an invisible enemy, that just adds another layer to the fear that's already gripping the planet.
So we've got famine, war, disease. What else could possibly go wrong?
Well, that's where the story takes a turn. Because if the previous events weren't strange enough...
Things are about to get really weird. Because remember those eyewitness reports we mentioned?
The ones about strange figures on horseback.
Yeah, those.
Yeah.
Apparently people have started seeing them.
Riding across the sky, leaving trails of destruction in their wake.
Now, some people are writing these reports off as mass hysteria. Which, let's be honest, with everything else going on.
It's not that hard to believe.
Right. But then you read these accounts, and there's this chilling consistency to them. Like, these people saw something real.
Something terrifying. Something apocalyptic.
And that brings us back to the Four Horsemen.
Riding across the sky, heralds of the end times. It's a powerful image.
And it makes you wonder, are these figures real? Are they hallucinations? Or something in between?
Maybe the scariest possibility is that it doesn't matter. Maybe what these figures represent, the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that our world is on the brink, maybe that's real enough.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are we so busy looking at our phones, so caught up in our own little worlds, that we've become blind to the bigger picture?
The world is sending us warning signs. The question is, are we listening?
Because sometimes the end doesn't come with a bang. It comes with a whisker. On the arrival of the fourth horseman, death.
And if the sources you sent me are anything to go by, it's gonna be a wild ride.
You're telling me the imagery is off the charts. And what really struck me is, it's not just about this lone figure on horseback, right? It's like the whole world is unraveling as he approaches.
It's that slow burn terror, the anticipation of the inevitable. It's very primal.
Okay, so let's set the scene. One of the sources you sent described the stars dimming, a blood moon hanging heavy in the sky.
Talk about ominous. It's like something out of a prophecy and not a good one.
Seriously. And you know, it's interesting, right? Because for centuries, people have associated those kinds of celestial events with doom and gloom.
Oh, absolutely. Eclipses, comets, blood moons, they tap into this primal fear of the unknown.
Exactly. Like, we're hardwired to be afraid of them. And it's not just in the heavens either. Some of the descriptions of the earthquakes, the storms, it's like nature itself is breaking down.
Right. It's like the whole world is reflecting this impending sense of doom. The very fabric of reality is coming undone. And this isn't some quick, clean apocalypse. This is the slow burn, that oppressive atmosphere, the air getting heavy, the feeling that something's terribly wrong.
It's palpable. And that slow descent into chaos makes the eventual arrival of death hit even harder.
It's like that moment of stunned silence after a bomb goes off. Disbelief mixed with dread.
Okay, so picture this. You're in a devastated city. Buildings are crumbling. The streets are deserted. The last remnants of civilization are huddled in a ruined church, clinging to hope.
Yeah.
And then silence.
Not a roar of thunder.
Nope. Not a deafening blast, not an earthquake, just a complete, unsettling quiet.
Wow, that sends chills down my spine. It's like the calm before the storm.
Way worse than the storm. That's how one of the sources described the arrival of death. And what's so chilling is he doesn't arrive with fanfare. He just is.
It's like he's less of a being and more of a force of nature, like gravity. You can't reason with it.
And think about the other horsemen. War, famine, pestilence. They've got their own kind of terrible grandeur. But death is different. He's inevitable. And that's terrifying.
You can fight a war, you can survive a famine, you can endure a plague, but death comes for everyone.
And when he arrives, there's no grand spectacle.
Yeah.
He's just there, draped in shadow on that pale horse.
And his power is so absolute.
Right. Where he passes, life just
Yeah.
ends. No gore, no struggle, no last words, just cessation.
It's the quietest apocalypse imaginable.
But in a way, it's the most terrifying.
Absolutely. There's no fighting it, no reasoning with it. There's a strange beauty in that, wouldn't you say?
Maybe. But you mentioned those survivors we pictured, huddled in that ruined church. Imagine being them.
They've probably heard the stories, the prophecies, but actually seeing death arrive. Talk about having your hope extinguished.
Right. And this is where I think we truly grasp the weight of the apocalypse. This isn't just a battle to be fought or a plague to be endured. This is it. This is the end of everything.
The arrival of death signals that the prophecy is fulfilled.
So we're left with this image, the end of days. But it does make you think, what happens next?
What does a world ruled by the Four Horsemen even look like?
It's a chilling thought. But you know, there's another question I keep coming back to. What does this whole scenario, this depiction of death, say about us? About our own fears and anxieties, even today?
That's the real question, isn't it? It's easy to be fascinated by the spectacle of the apocalypse, but what does it say about our own mortality?
I don't know, but I think that's something worth thinking about.
Definitely. Food for thought, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, on that cheery note, until next time.
In part 4, humanity's desperate struggle, right? This section, it's about as intense as it gets.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about it. Every strategy, every tactic,
Every prayer.
totally
Useless.
everything humanity throws at these horsemen, it just falls flat.
I mean, talk about a sense of hopelessness, right?
Pervasive, I'd say. It seeps into every aspect of life.
Like, picture this. War. But not just your regular war. This is war with a capital W.
Oh yeah, this is the archetype.
This isn't about borders or ideologies anymore. This is pure, primal hatred, just consuming everything in its path. Diplomacy, peace talks, forget about it.
Laughable in this scenario.
And it's not even just the fighting, right? I mean, war like this, it just like unravels everything.
Of course, the systems, the trust, it all crumbles.
You know, it makes all those concerns we have today, like supply chain issues or food security, they just seem...
Insignificant.
Yeah, totally insignificant. And then you've got famine on top of it all. We're not talking about like skipping a meal or two.
This is starvation on a global scale.
Empty fields, barren oceans, the whole 9 yards.
Makes you think twice about that grocery store run, huh?
For real. And as if war and famine weren't enough, you've got pestilence to deal with too.
Oh, this is the kicker.
Hospitals overflowing, people dropping like flies, and the fear, man, the sheer panic.
You see echoes of every pandemic in history, but dialed up to 11.
Black Death got nothing on this.
And what makes it truly terrifying is the one constant throughout it all: death.
The ever-present shadow, right?
The inescapable truth that binds all of this suffering together.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the darkness here, but there is this like little spark.
A flicker of defiance.
Yeah, exactly. The resistance, they call themselves.
A fascinating development, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And get this, it's not just like a random group of survivors.
No, this is organized, strategic.
Yeah, you've got scientists, soldiers, even spiritual leaders, all banding together.
It seems humanity is pulling out all the stops.
Makes you wonder, what are they even hoping to achieve? What's their end game against something so
Insidious.
inescapable?
Both. I mean, every day that passes, the horsemen, they just grow stronger. Their grip on the world, it tightens.
The clock is ticking.
It makes you wonder, is there even enough time? Can they really hope to fight back against forces this powerful? Forces that seem almost woven into the fabric of existence.
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question.
Right? I mean, where do you even begin to fight back against something like that? What would you do? Seriously, let us know, because we want to know. If you were staring down the Four Horsemen, what would your first move be?
But, you know, digging into all this apocalyptic chaos, there's this, well, almost a spark, like a last hope kind of thing. People talking about a way to actually stop the horsemen.
Wild, right? Sounds like a long shot.
Oh, absolutely. But hey, desperate times, right? So let's dive into this. We're talking about prophecies here, ancient texts, the whole 9 yards, people scouring for any clue, any edge.
Classic human response, isn't it? Crisis hits, we dig into the past looking for answers, like we're hardwired to find patterns, even in chaos.
Right, it's like we want some proof that somebody somewhere has been through this before. And get this, their ice, this one prophecy, mentions a way to fight back against the horsemen. Nobody knows what it actually means, of course.
Ah, the mystery deepens. That's where the real chaos starts, right? When nobody can agree on the answer.
Exactly. And that's what's got everyone scrambling down these 3, let's call them paths. First up, you've got your relic hunters. These guys are hardcore, raiding tombs, temples, anything ancient. They're looking for a weapon, a map, who knows, some kind of artifact to turn the tide.
Talk about a leap of faith, huh? Betting the fate of humanity on a dusty old relic.
Right, but you can almost understand it, right? Something tangible, something you can hold in your hand. It's almost reassuring. Like, if we can just find this one thing, we're saved.
It's about control, I think. In that kind of chaos, grasping at anything that feels real, solid. Can't really blame them, can you?
Then you've got the flip side, the spiritual seekers. We're talking every faith, every denomination coming together. It's actually kind of beautiful in a way, all united, praying for a miracle, some kind of divine intervention.
And the silence must be deafening. Imagine that weight on your shoulders. The fate of humanity resting on whether or not someone's listening upstairs. Does it strengthen your faith? Or does it make you question everything?
It's heavy stuff, makes you think, huh? And then there's the, well, I guess you could call it the underdog path, the human potential path.
The one that feels almost naive, right? Like, oh, humanity will just figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Like when faced with complete annihilation, we'll just band together and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
It's the Hollywood ending. But even in the darkest times, there are those glimmers, right? Moments where humanity, against all odds, they rise to the occasion.
That's true, actually. You've got those stories. People surviving against impossible odds, finding the strength, the will to keep going when everything's telling them to give up.
It's that flicker of defiance that makes us human, isn't it? That refusal to just lie down and accept things. It makes you wonder, what would it take to ignite that on a global scale?
And here's the kicker, right? While all this is going on, the horsemen, yeah, they're not just sitting around waiting, they're gaining ground every single day.
Talk about pressure. Every decision, every moment takes on this insane weight, knowing the time is literally running out.
So here we are, 3 paths, each one a long shot, all racing against the apocalypse. And I gotta ask, putting yourself in that position, world crumbling around you, which path are you drawn to? The tangible hope of a relic, the faith in something bigger than yourself, or that leap, believing in the potential of humanity? What does that say about you when faced with the end of everything?
It's a question we all have to answer for ourselves. Because in the end, maybe that choice, that leap of faith, maybe that's what defines us.
Think about that. Well, what happens when the stuff of nightmares becomes reality?
And not just for some elite force. This is about everyday folks.
Right, exactly. It's not your typical heroes and villains scenario. These are teachers, shopkeepers.
The librarian down the street.
Yeah, exactly. People you'd see walking their dog or grabbing groceries, suddenly thrust into a fight for survival.
And what they've got is this ancient obsidian tablet.
They're right, this artifact unearthed from some forgotten corner of the world. That's their one hope.
But it's more than just some mystical artifact, right? It actually reacts to the horsemen.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. I mean, you read this and you have to ask, was this thing designed to fight them?
Almost like, stumbling on a suit of armor clearly made to fight a dragon. Makes you think, somebody's tangled with dragons before.
Right. And who created it? How did they know about the horsemen, let alone how to fight them?
Big questions. And speaking of big, the moment this tablet is found, the horsemen descend on the resistance.
And when I say descend, I mean it's not a meet and greet. It's an all-out invasion.
They know this thing's a threat.
The way the source describes it, war, he's the first. He doesn't arrive with a bang, but almost a whisper. This subtle kind of creeping dread.
Turning neighbor against neighbor.
Exactly. It's insidious. Suddenly everyone's on edge, suspicious, the smallest disagreement escalating into rage.
And it's not just war, right? We've got pestilence, famine.
Oh, they're all here? Pestilence, now that's a nightmare. Think weaponized every fear you've ever had about getting sick, times 10.
The air itself feels dangerous.
Right. And famine. It's like this slow, agonizing draining of life, not just from people, but from the land itself. Crops wither, wells run dry.
So it just kind of, evaporates.
Yes, exactly. It's starvation of the body and the soul. And then there's death. He's always there, looming, the silent, chilling presence.
Amplifying the terror of the others.
Exactly.
So you've got these everyday people armed with this mysterious artifact going up against, well, the embodiment of the apocalypse. Doesn't exactly scream fair fight.
No, not at all. But here's the thing. They fight back.
Yeah, this first confrontation.
It's really a testament to the human spirit.
Because how do you even begin to fight something like that?
Right. And that's the key here. You see, it's not a physical battle. It's a battle of wills. The resistance, they have to confront war's influence, but also...
Or darkness within themselves.
Exactly. They have to rise above the fear, the anger, the despair that war feeds on. And in doing so, they tap into something in the tablet. In war, he hesitates.
Which, I mean, come on, that's huge, right? It's one thing for them to have a weapon, it's another for it to actually work. So what's that hesitation tell us?
I think it tells us the horsemen, as powerful as they aren't invincible. That their power, maybe it's tied to belief, to our own despair.
So by resisting.
The resistance is tapping into something much deeper, something hopeful, a possibility, even in the thing of oblivion.
There's always a but.
Right. It's a small victory. It's just one battle. The other horsemen, they're still out there, and they haven't even begun to fight back.
So a glimmer of hope. But man, what a threat still hanging over everything.
Yeah.
I have to wonder, even if they can use this artifact against all of them, what'd be left? What's the cost of survival against these odds?
Yeah.
Something to think about. The whole apocalypse starter pack. But, and this is a big but, we're actually going to see one of them fall.
That's right. The big bad, war himself, gets taken down a peg or two.
And the source material we're looking at today, let me tell you, it's not your average apocalypse story.
Not at all. It really makes you think, about how we as humans, with all our flaws, might actually be fueling these apocalyptic forces.
Whoa, okay, so you're saying it's like our own fault, like our anger and hate are what these horsemen feed on.
That's exactly what this story is getting at. It's kind of unsettling when you think about it. And right in the middle of all this chaos and destruction, we meet this woman, Sarah.
And Sarah, she's not just some random survivor, she's a leader. But more importantly, someone who's experienced the horrors of war firsthand.
It makes her stand against these forces so much more powerful because she's not just fighting an abstract enemy. She's fighting against the very thing that took everything from her.
And she's not fighting empty-handed either. She's got this ancient tablet. But here's where it gets wild. The tablet's power is connected to hope, to resistance.
You got it. The more the resistance fights, the brighter the tablet glows. It's almost as if human willpower, the refusal to give up, fuels this ancient artifact.
Talk about a beacon of hope in the middle of utter darkness. And the way they describe her chanting these words from this language that's been lost to time, it's eerie, but also empowering.
It really sets the stage for something big about to happen, like something shifting. And sure enough, war, this being who's all about chaos and conflict, he starts to falter.
Wait, so it's not just like he's getting tired or anything?
No, it's way deeper than that. It's like something inside him is breaking, something essential.
Okay, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
It's as if these words, empowered by hope, by the will of humanity to survive, they're severing the very connection war has to human conflict.
So it's not just a physical fight. It's like a battle for the soul of humanity. And it's not just war who's affected, right? Even the soldiers, they start to feel it too.
Absolutely. The desire for battle, the rage that fueled them, it just fades away. It's like watching a fire die out. And this is where the story really hits home for me.
Because it shows that even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
Yes. And the power of words. Think about how propaganda, how certain narratives can lead people to do unthinkable things. This story, it's like the antidote to that. It suggests that hope, when articulated clearly and powerfully, it can actually dismantle those narratives that lead to violence.
And that's where Sarah's message comes in, right? We are more than our hatred, more than our rage. It's such a simple message, but in that moment, it feels like a rallying cry.
Exactly. It makes you question, are we, in our own lives, letting our anger and fear control us? Are we in some way feeding the very things we fear?
Man, that's a heavy thought. And it gets even heavier because war is just one of them, right? We still got pestilence, famine, death, just waiting in the wings.
Right, and the story doesn't shy away from that. In fact, it suggests that they might even be more terrifying now that war is gone.
And the way they describe war's end. He doesn't just die, he crumbles like dust. It's like he was never even really there.
That's a crucial detail that many miss. It shows that without our fear and conflict, war is nothing. He ceases to exist. Which begs the question, if hope can vanquish war, What will it take to face the others?
What will it take to combat the despair, the hunger, the fear of death?
Those are big questions, and this deep dive just scratches the surface.
But one thing's for sure. This story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, even facing the apocalypse, hope and resistance have the power to win. But the real fight, that lies in figuring out what we're willing to fight for.
Picture this. The air shimmers, reality kind of fractures, and then you've got the Four Horsemen, those harbingers of doom, appearing. But this isn't some dusty old prophecy. This is actually going down in our story.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're talking war, pestilence, famine, and death. They're like the embodiment of humanity's deepest fears, and they're depicted in this really vivid, unsettling way.
And you're immediately thrown into the action. The resistance has managed to beat back war, but it feels more like a temporary reprieve than a true victory,
That's what's so unsettling about this story. The horsemen just keep coming, each one seemingly more terrifying than the last.
It's like this constant escalation. We shift from the outright chaos of war to this insidious dread of pestilence. Plagues are sweeping across the globe. People are mutating into these horrific forms. And then there's this vile fog that just permeates everything. It's like a constant reminder that nowhere is safe.
It's a really clever way to show how pestilence operates, how it's not just brute force, but this invisible, insidious enemy.
Which makes the whole resistance effort seem even more desperate, don't you think? Fighting something you can't even see, something that's literally in the air you breathe. And that's where we meet Dr. Elena Foster, this virologist who becomes a symbol of hope in the story.
And what's interesting is that Elena doesn't have superpowers or anything. Her strength is in her unwavering faith in humanity, in our ability to survive even the worst possible circumstances.
And it's even more powerful because she's literally surrounded by reasons to give up, right? She's dealing with these plagues, these mutations, yet she still believes that humanity can overcome it all. And here's the thing. She's got this ancient tablet, right? It's this artifact that seems to pulse with this, raw human energy. They never fully explain it, but you get the sense that it's not like a magic wand or something.
More like a conduit, I'd say. Like it's channeling Elena's hope, her belief, and amplifying it. And it's interesting because it kind of mirrors what we've seen in the real world when humanity has faced pandemics.
Totally. Like when we went up against the Spanish flu or even eradicated smallpox, those weren't victories won by magic, but through hard work, science, and everyone coming together.
Exactly. And in the story, Elena's unwavering faith seems to be fueling the tablet, pushing back against pestilence. And this is where things take a turn. Pestilence is actually forced to reveal itself, and it's not this invincible force, but something that can be weakened, even defeated by human resilience.
Almost like our collective will to survive is a superpower in itself. But just when you think they might catch a break, the story throws another curveball.
Because right as humanity dares to feel a glimmer of hope, this bone-chilling wind sweeps over everything. And it's not just the aftermath of pestilence, it's something new, something else taking hold.
Act 3. Facing famine, finding hope, and you literally feel the ground cracking. The air itself feels starved, and there's this overwhelming wave of despair. It's like if pestilence preyed on that fear of the unseen, famine goes straight for that deep-seated anxiety of scarcity. That fear of not having enough.
And if that vile fog was the defining image of pestilence, famine brings this stark emptiness. Crops wither, the land is barren. It's like even the colors are draining away.
And standing against this embodiment of lack of desperation is not some great warrior or another scientist, but an old farmer. This guy who's lost everything, his farm, his family, everything, but he still keeps planting seeds in the dry earth.
And you think about how that resonates even today, right? Just like that farmer, we all face our own famines, times when resources feel scarce, whether it's time or energy or even hope. But history shows us we can find ways to adapt. Look at communities that survive terrible famines by developing new farming techniques or finding ways to share resources.
It's like hitting that wall, that feeling of there's no way out. That actually sparks innovation, right? And in the story, it's that farmer's refusal to give up, his sheer will, that seems to awaken the tablet again. And you see it again, that same wave of energy, like a tide of greenwashing over the barren landscape as the crops just erupt from the ground. Famine weakens, eventually fades away completely. And it's this moment of pure relief, but then there's this underlying tension because you realize only death is left.
And that's what makes the story so clever, right? Because death isn't something you can just fight with like weapons or medicine. It's this universal force present in every culture, every mythology.
So it leaves you wondering, how do you even begin to confront something like that? Can that tablet, this symbol of human resilience, actually stand against the very concept of ending?
Well, here's where things get really interesting. Death doesn't show up as some Grim Reaper figure. Instead, it's this chilling absence, a void that threatens to consume everything.
Wow. It's like the story is asking, what does it even mean to face that kind of absolute ending? Is it even about winning or losing at that point?
And what's fascinating is the story doesn't give you any easy answers. You're left grappling with those questions, with a very human struggle to understand our own mortality.
Which might be the most powerful message of all, right? I mean, it's not some big, flashy battle that stays with you, but this quiet contemplation on how we live in the face of the inevitable.
Exactly. It reminds us that resilience, hope, that spark of defiance we see in Elena and the farmer, those aren't just ideas. They're tools we use to find meaning, even though we know it will all eventually end.
And maybe that is the real victory, Choosing hope, even when things are bleak. Planting those seeds, even in the face of famine. Believing in humanity, even when the world seems determined to prove us wrong.
It's a powerful message, for sure. This wasn't just some story about fighting mythical beings, but a reminder that we face those battles every single day, those tests of our will, our spirit. And it's in those moments, those quiet moments of choice, that we decide what it truly means to be alive.
It brings us face to face with, death himself. But before you think it's all doom and gloom, trust me, it's about hope. It's about looking those deep down fears right in the eye.
And I have to say, the way this story tackles those big universal fears, it's really something.
Right. It's set in this apocalyptic world, but what it says about life, about death, about everything in between, it's surprisingly uplifting.
Absolutely.
Now, if you recall from where we left off, war, pestilence, famine, those horsemen, they had been defeated. But instead of this, big celebration, the story throws us right into this, deeper darkness. Imagine this world gone eerily quiet, the air is thick, heavy with anticipation, and then there he is, death.
It's really fascinating how the story uses silence, isn't it? It's like in that quiet, that stillness, the real weight of everything, it just sinks in.
Totally. And the story, it makes a point of saying how different he is from the other horsemen, right?
Yeah.
They were forces of nature for sure, but you could almost wrap your head around fighting them, maybe even winning. But death, he's not a battle to be won.
No, not at all. He's inevitable. And that's where this story gets you. It taps into that fear we all have, that no matter how much we try to outrun it, death always catches up.
Right. He just is. The story describes him as this stark silhouette against a dying sunset. Not a king, not a warrior like the others. Something much more unsettling.
Exactly. And the survivors, they feel it too. It's not a final blow that breaks them. It's knowing there's nowhere to run. No escaping what's coming.
It's like that weight just crushes them, right?
Right. It's a very human response, don't you think? When we come up against something that big, that powerful, our instinct is to despair. We can face down challenges, try to overcome threats. But death is the one opponent none of us can beat. But even in all that darkness, right, little spark, we meet Elijah. And he's not a warrior, no shining armor, just an old man. You can practically see the weight of all those years on him.
I like that you point that out because the story makes a big deal about how he's not some epic hero. Just a man, someone who's lived long enough to know you can't win every fight.
Exactly.
And everyone else, they're ready to give in. I mean, who could blame them, right? But Elijah, he steps forward. He's got this ancient tablet, but it's drained, used up from the battles with the other horsemen. What do you think's going through his head at that moment?
I think the story's using that detail about the tablet on purpose. It's like it's hinting at something.
Like what?
Well, that tablet, it was all about fighting back, right? Defying fate. Now it's empty. Like, it's saying true strength isn't about overpowering. It's about understanding.
And that's Elijah in a nutshell. He doesn't beg, doesn't try to make a deal, just looks death right in the eye.
And says,
"We all must face you, death, but it is not our defeat." I mean, chills, right? He just changes the whole conversation with those few words.
Absolutely. There's this quiet strength in that statement. You can practically feel the story pause.
Yeah.
Like it wants us to really hear it. And death, think about it, for maybe the first time ever, he doesn't meet defiance, he meets acceptance.
And what's even wilder, death hesitates, doesn't lash out, doesn't strike him down. It's like this moment of stillness, almost like death is surprised.
Well, he's used to a certain reaction, right? Fear, denial, bargaining.
And Elijah comes along and just accepts.
Exactly. And that's the first chip in the armor, the beginning of something new.
Like the story wants us to think, maybe we're not afraid of death itself. Maybe we're afraid of just accepting it. And right then, in that quiet, the story, it takes this really interesting turn. Elijah, he's not looking at death like he's some monster to fight. It's more like he's, acknowledging something bigger than all of us. And he says, "You do not end us. You only guide us to the next journey." Just wow. I mean, talk about a powerful way to look at it, right?
It really is. Elijah, he doesn't pretend death isn't powerful, but he changes what that power means. It's like he's taking this thing we all fear, this unavoidable thing, and instead of letting it be scary, he makes it a bridge, a beginning.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. The story doesn't go how you'd expect. There's no big battle, no last stand. Death just leaves, melts away with the light, quiet as he came.
Almost like it's symbolic, wouldn't you say? The story could give us a happy ending, a victory lap. But this is better, don't you think? More real? Death isn't the enemy anymore, just part of it all.
And the world, it's like everyone takes a breath. The story even says something about a gentle unfolding, like a fresh start. But they're not celebrating beating death, are they?
No, and that's important. The story isn't saying they cheated death. They're thankful, sure, but it's quiet, like they understand now. Really understand. Life's precious because it doesn't last forever.
This whole story, it really makes you think, maybe sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting what we know is coming, but just understanding it, accepting it.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what else could we handle if we thought like that? Not just about death, but everything.
That's something to think about, isn't it?
It really is.
Like, what makes these guys tick? You know, their motivations. And maybe, just maybe we'll find a sliver of, like, humanity in these, well, infamous figures.
Yeah, because, I mean, let's be real for a sec. Everyone thinks they know the Four Horsemen War, Pestilence, Famine, and, of course, death, right? But what if, and stick with me here, what if there's more to them? Like, what if they're not just these, one-dimensional forces of destruction? What if they're more like reflections of our own, complexities?
Whoa, now that's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
And I think it all starts with, just kind of shifting our perspective a bit.
Exactly. So let's get this thing started with war. I mean, he's usually seen as just this, like, unstoppable force of chaos
and destruction,
right?
Yeah, for sure. But there's another layer there you got to think about. Like, war often sees himself as, well, a catalyst, right? Like, he's here to shake things up. He believes that to grow, you got to have destruction first.
Okay. I see where you're going with this. It's kind of a disturbing thought, but history is full of examples, right? Like tons of examples where these huge upheavals, like they led to progress. Take, for example, the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
Brutal, right? But it ushered in like a whole new era. So like, do you think that kind of progress, could it have happened without that the massive destruction?
Well, that exact question, it's puzzled historians, philosophers, like everyone for centuries, right? Did those civilizations, did they have to fall apart for new ideas to come about, for new systems to emerge? Or was there another path? Like, could it have been, well, less destructive?
Man, that's a lot to think about. But it does make you wonder, like, if war sees himself this way as this, force of change, does he ever, question the cost? Like, does he look back at all the destruction, all the lives lost and think, man, I messed up?
That's where things get really interesting. See, there's this belief, right, that even war, even with all his, might and fury and all that, that maybe, just maybe, he feels a flicker of regret. I mean, imagine it, right? All those battles, all those lives lost, it's all on him, That's got to be a heavy burden to carry, even for, like, an entity as powerful as war.
Dude, that's kind of haunting when you think about it. It really makes you see war in, like, a whole new light. But speaking of unsettling, let's move on to another horseman who tends to freak people out. Pestilence.
Oh, yeah. Pestilence. The one who brings plagues, diseases, all that fun stuff. He's like the embodiment of our deepest fears, the stuff we can't see, can't control, the stuff that can just, like, unravel the world.
It's true. He's like this terrifying loss of control, It's this reminder that we're really not as in charge as we think we are, that life is, well, fragile.
Yeah, and yet there's this chilling logic to, like, his whole deal. See, Pestilence, he thinks he's got this crucial role to play. He's all about maintaining balance, right? Like too much of a good thing and all that. He's the force that corrects things when there's too much, overgrowth. Like a reminder that life and death, well, they're forever linked.
Yeah, that's a harsh reminder for sure. But I see what you're saying about balance. It's like that saying, nature abhors a vacuum. Something's got to give, right? When things get out of whack.
Exactly. It's like nature wants to be in equilibrium, right? And Pestilence, well, he thinks he's a part of that. Like he's part of the grand plan, the natural order of things.
So it's not like personal with him. Like he doesn't get off on spreading disease. He's not just doing it to be, malicious.
Well, not necessarily. In fact, some people think that Pestilence might even feel, I don't know, a sense of like detachment, kind of a clinical remove from all the the suffering he causes.
Like he's just doing his job, right?
Yeah.
Some unpleasant but necessary duty.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings up another question. Like, if Pestilence is all about this balance, does he ever, factor in how resilient humans are? Like, we're pretty good at adapting, right? Overcoming diseases, even the deadly ones. Do you think he sees that?
Makes you wonder. Does he see us fighting to survive as, I don't know, like part of the balance he's trying to maintain?
Now there's an intriguing thought. And it kind of gets to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there's more to these guys, than we see on the surface. That even figures like, Pestilence, maybe they have some surprising depth.
Man, it's a lot to process. It really is. But if he reminds us that life is fragile, well, our next horseman, he takes us even further. Like, he forces us to look at the decline, the slow, agonizing decline that comes with, deprivation, the physical, the spiritual, all of it. Let's talk about famine. And he doesn't just mess with, like, food supplies, right? Like, he messes with everything.
Yeah, it's way deeper than that. Famine is all about, like, this emptiness, that just, like, consumes everything. Hope, community, you name it. Like, all the things that make life, worth living.
It's like, we gotta eat, right? It's basic.
Yeah.
But he takes that and, I don't know, twists it into something, like, really awful.
Totally. And the thing is, like, war can be quick, right? And Pestilence, well, sometimes it's quick. But famine takes his time. He just, like, grinds you down, slowly.
Right.
Until there's nothing left, just, like, despair.
Man, it's bleak. It really is. But it makes you think, like, does he care? Does he see this slow motion collapse and, like, feel bad? Or is he just, I don't know, indifferent?
There are some who believe that famine, deep down, he's got this, like, deep sadness. It's not that he likes seeing people suffer or anything, but he just gets it, He understands, like, really understands what happens when we don't have what we need, when we're at our most basic.
So it's like he doesn't just bring the famine, he's got to, like, watch it happen too.
Right, exactly. And that, all that exposure, seeing people fall apart, seeing society crumble, hope disappearing, I mean, it's got to take a toll. Some even imagine him like as this tragic figure condemned to just watch the worst of humanity over and over again. Man,
that would mess you up. Makes you think, like, what would you do? How would you handle seeing that much despair every single day?
That's the question, right? Philosophers, writers, artists, they've been wrestling with that one forever. Because famine, he forces us to look at, some ugly truths about ourselves. Like, what are we willing to do when our backs are against the wall to survive?
It really makes you appreciate the little things, Having food on the table, a roof over your head, stuff we take for granted.
I hear that. And, it reminds us that even though famine's this powerful force, we're not totally helpless. We can be compassionate. We can share. We can build systems that make sure that everyone has what they need, the basics.
It's like, even with the horsemen like that, right? There's still hope. We can still make a difference. But okay, let's talk about, the elephant in the room, or should we say the skeleton in the room? Death. The one horseman we're all going to meet. But he's still, like, this huge mystery. Everyone's afraid of him.
And for good reason, right? I mean, Death, he's like the ultimate unknown. It's the end, Our stories are over, curtain call.
For real. But here's the thing, and it's kind of wild when you think about it, but in all this, with the horsemen, Death might be the biggest surprise of all, because when you really look, he's not the Grim Reaper, Not like we imagine him.
Nope, not at all. Forget the whole, creepy dude with the scythe thing. This Death, he's more like a guide, I guess. He exists outside of time, just watches the way life and death, do their thing. With a kind of, I don't know, like a detached wisdom.
Okay, so not out to get us. More like a cosmic usher. That's definitely different.
It makes you rethink death itself,
Yeah.
Like, instead of being afraid, like it's the end, maybe it's more like a transition, just a natural part of this huge, like, never-ending cycle.
Tons of cultures have thought about it that way, right? For a long time, I mean, ancient rituals, spiritual practices, all of it.
Exactly. People can't get enough of death.
Yeah.
They build monuments, write poems, tell stories, all to try to figure out this thing that we all have to face.
We're hardwired for it, right? To try and make sense of it, even if it's, like, the biggest mystery there is. But you said before that Death, he sees it all with this detachment. Do you think he feels anything, though? Watching it all play out, the cycle never ending, does he have regrets? Loneliness, maybe? So he's not just, like, bringing famine. He's, like, forced to watch it all go down.
Yeah, exactly. And imagine, like, that constant exposure, to suffering, to, like, seeing society fall apart, all that hope just, like, disappearing. It's gotta take a toll, right? Some even imagine him as this, like, tragic figure, forever cursed to observe the worst of what we're capable of as humans.
Man, that's heavy. Makes you wonder, right? Like, what would you do? How could you handle seeing that much despair day after day?
It's like the ultimate question, isn't it? I mean, philosophers, artists, writers, they've all wrestled with it, like, forever. Because Famine, he makes us confront some really uncomfortable stuff about ourselves, right? About, like, what we'd be willing to do to survive when it's, do or die time.
Makes you appreciate, I don't know, a home-cooked meal, a roof over your head, the stuff we just, like, expect to have.
Totally. And it reminds us that even though famine is this, like, insanely powerful force, it doesn't mean we're powerless, right? We can choose compassion, we can choose to share, to build, systems that make sure that everyone has at least the basics.
Right, like even facing a horseman like that, there's still, I don't know, hope for us. We can still make things better.
Okay.
Okay, but can we talk about the, I guess you could say the elephant in the room, or maybe the skeleton in the room is more fitting?
Oh, who'd we miss?
Death. He's the one horseman we're all going to meet eventually, right? But he's still like this huge mystery, shrouded in fear and all that.
And for good reason. Death is like the ultimate unknown, right? It's the end of our story, the final curtain call.
Totally. And here's what's so interesting to me in all of this. With the horseman, Death, he might be the most surprising of all of them. Because when you look closer, he's not, the Grim Reaper. Like, he's not who we expect him to be.
Nope. Not at all. Forget that whole creepy dude with his scythe thing. This Death, he's more like, a guide maybe? He's outside of time, just kind of observing the way life and death, do their thing. With this, like, I don't know how to describe it, like a detached sort of wisdom,
Okay, so not evil. Not coming for us all with, like, malice in his heart. More like a cosmic usher. That's definitely a different way to think about death.
Right. It makes you rethink the whole thing, like instead of fearing death, being terrified that it's the end, maybe it's just like a transition, just a normal part of this huge, massive, never-ending cycle.
Yeah, tons of cultures have thought about it that way, for like ever. I mean, look, ancient rituals, spiritual practices, all of it.
Totally. Death is like endlessly fascinating. People build monuments, write poems, tell stories, all just to try and wrap their heads around this thing that we all have to face.
Yeah, we're hardwired to make sense of it, right? Even if it's like the biggest mystery there is. But you said the Death, he's like detached from it all, right? Do you think he feels anything, though? Watching everything played out, this endless cycle, regret, maybe, loneliness?
Now that is a fascinating question. I mean, think about it. Can you imagine existing outside of time? Watching civilizations rise and fall, stars being born and dying, all with this like detached observation.
It's almost like I can't even wrap my head around it.
And yet there are those who believe that even within that vast, cosmic awareness, death might also experience a profound, like really profound sense of loneliness.
Loneliness? Why loneliness?
Well, imagine, right, seeing the beauty, the tragedy of every life ever lived, but you can't, engage with it. To see love, joy, sorrow, loss, but only from a distance. To never truly experience it yourself.
Yeah, that's a whole other level of loneliness, to be like a part of everything and yet totally apart from it all.
Exactly. It's like this paradox,
Yeah.
And it speaks to like just how complex death really is. He's the end and the beginning,
Yeah.
He's the destroyer, but also like the liberator.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, within that, within that duality, maybe there's something there, something that helps us understand our own place in all of this.
Wow. That's a lot. So, okay, we've spent all this time with war, pestilence, famine, death, right? We dove into what makes them tick, how complex they are, even like how they might have regrets. But if there's one thing I'm taking away from this whole thing, it's that maybe, just maybe, the horsemen, they're not just harbingers of destruction, Maybe they're more like reflections of us, of our own capacity for darkness and light.
100%. Because inside each and every one of us, it's all there.
Yeah.
The potential for amazing things and for terrible things. Love, rage, hope, despair. The Four Horsemen, they're just like these forces on a huge scale. A reminder that we all have that power within us and that responsibility too.
So next time you're thinking about the horsemen, whether it's, mythology or a book you read, or even just like your own thoughts, remember to look deeper, Look past the surface. Find the nuances, the weird stuff, the glimmers of, well, I don't know what else to call it, but like glimmers of humanity. Because if you do that, you might learn something about yourself, about how resilient we are as humans.
Maybe that's the message they've been trying to get across all along.
Now there's something to think about. That's it for this deep dive into the Four Horsemen, everyone. This is The Deep Dive. Signing off. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into all the all the wonder and terror this world has to offer.